Hello and welcome back to the Usage Report podcast. I am your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as at BChat50. And week 4, as usual, provided us some playing time changes, some usage changes around the league. And one situation that feels like it remains quite a bit the same is in Cincinnati, and that's their backfield. And it remains a mess. Jeremy Hill played the most snaps in the backfield, playing 31 to Giovanni Bernard's 24, but he once again lagged behind Bernard in carries by a margin of 13-9 and trailed him in yardage, 62 rushing yards to 40. But thankfully, Jeremy Hill scampered for 3 touchdowns, basically giving you the type of performance you would look for from a guy that you spent a first-round pick on, like owners did with Hill this year. Unfortunately, being that touchdown reliant and seeing that kind of workload spread does remain a concern. It does open up an opportunity to sell on Jeremy Hill, and unfortunately, I'm not the only pundit that is out there suggesting to sell him. So the market's not likely to be very robust, but at this point, getting out from under him and this running back by committee situation is probably wise. My suggestion is to try and pull off a 2-for-2, unless, of course, you're looking to swap a running back for a receiver. That's a situation where 1-for-1 makes sense. But usually when you're dealing with 1-for-1s at the same position and you're trying to deal a player like Hill, that other owner is going to be skeptical of a 1-for-1 offer. So on that note, I would look at trying to make a 2-for-2 or a larger magnitude deal involving Hill, where it appears on the surface that you're downgrading at tailback while upgrading someplace else. In this week's article, I suggest perhaps targeting Lamar Miller, who's on bye this week. But the coaching change in Miami, I do think, does give him a little bit of upside coming out of the break, as there's a chance that they could make it a priority to establish the run more with their new interim head coach. So he's just one example, but there are other ideas out there. The most important thing is take advantage of this opportunity off of Hill's big 3 touchdown performance and see what's available, see what you can get in return for him, because it's still a mess in that backfield. Giovanni Bernard has done enough to carve out a significant role and make that a true timeshare. So if you can get something of value for Hill and avoid the volatility that comes with basically relying on a committee back whose value is going to be tied to goal line work, which thankfully Hill will get. So if you can't get anything for him, you do have the guy that's going to get the goal line work, but I would be trying to shop him very aggressively right now. Staying in the same state, the Cleveland Browns backfield situation is starting to sort itself out just a little bit. Duke Johnson played 45 snaps to Isaiah Crowell's 27. Johnson was a big part of the passing game, received 10 targets and totaled 9 receptions, led the team in receiving yards and receptions this week. Also chipped in 31 yards on 8 carries. Johnson's a more versatile back than Isaiah Crowell. He's the back to own in this backfield. And the rookie back definitely increasing. His stock is definitely on the rise in PPR leagues. In fact, it's on the rise in all leagues, but in PPR formats where he's totaled 15 receptions for 117 yards the last 2 weeks, he's become a flex option with his increased playing time. And in standard leagues, going to probably need a little bit more from him to feel comfortable with him as a flex, because so much of his value is tied to the passing game. But he's at least knocking on the door, and his stock is up. Isaiah Crowell not likely to just fade off and have no role in this backfield, but it's definitely Johnson's backfield now. Looking at another backfield situation, we'll head to Dallas, where unfortunately Lance Dunbar suffered a season-ending ACL tear. Joseph Randle led the way in snaps, also led the way in carries, but trailed Darren McFadden in yardage by a margin of 31-26. Neither back was terribly effective. Randle found himself in the doghouse after a touchdown run where he basically extended the ball out with one hand, had it knocked away, but not until after he crossed the goal line. That was enough to draw the ire of head coach Jason Garrett, some of the other assistant coaches. According to multiple reports and quotes from Garrett himself, the coaching staff has preached not to take those type of gambles around the goal line, that it's not worth it. And though Randle scored a touchdown, he did end up catching some flack for that. And it does seem like his leash is reduced based on something as silly as that. But with a snap margin of 25 for Randall, 20 for McFadden, it looked like Randall might run away with this job to some extent. Definitely end up with the heavier workload. I would still expect him to be the feature back going into this weekend's contest against New England, but it does seem like he's teetering on that fine edge of ending up in Jason Garrett's doghouse. And Christine Michael was active for the first time this year as the fourth running back with Dunbar down. Now I would anticipate on him being active going forward as the RB3. McFadden's done next to nothing this year. Very unimpressive, averaging under 4 yards per carry. Randall is actually averaging under 4 yards per carry as well. If this turns into a blowout, which is capable of, the Patriots can hang a big number. You might see some garbage time for Christine Michael to get a look at him and get him some reps in meaningful games. And I do think there's that potential for Randall getting Wally pipped if he ends up in the doghouse and Michael gets some playing time. Michael is basically your dream in terms of measurables. He's a big back that runs fast. Can do it all, but he hasn't done it from a production standpoint at the NFL level. The Seahawks used a second-round pick on him in the 2003 draft, and he just never was able to carve out a niche there behind beast mode. So maybe he'll have that chance back in Texas. He was a Texas A&M back. That return to Texas might spark a little something in him, but that backfield situation should be Randall's. But the fact that he's in the doghouse, the fact that he's kind of perturbed Jason Garrett could spell some fantasy value for Michael long-term down the stretch. Another backfield situation that is a mess is in Denver. Ronnie Hillman rattled off a 72-yard touchdown run, easily paced the backs in rushing yards this week by a margin of 103 to 43. Did play less snaps than C.J. Anderson, but he equaled him in touches with 11 carries and 1 reception. Both were responsible for the same number of carries and targets and touches or receptions, but once again, Hillman was the more effective back. You can say, take off the 72-yard run, and it's still it's an unimpressive showing for Hillman. But the fact that Hillman has that burst and was able to rip off that 72-yard run is another feather in his cap. This looks like it's a mess. Last week I was preaching patience with Anderson because I liked the upcoming schedule, thought that he'd have a chance to get his season turned around. But another week showing, and Hillman showed up. So now you're basically stuck holding on to Anderson at this point in hopes that he is able to right the ship in one of these soft matchups. But this looks like a situation where they're going to continue to split the workload between Anderson and Hillman because Hillman isn't a bigger back. I do think Anderson will continue to have probably split the usage 50-50. It's hard for me to envision Hillman turning into a true bell cow there, even though he's been more effective than Anderson. I just don't think they want to utilize him in that way. But if Hillman happens to be available on your wire, he needs to be grabbed at this point. He's been the much more effective back, and it isn't hard to envision that the scale's tipping toward him being the more prominently featured back, even if that is still in a timeshare where Anderson gets some looks. The next running back situation we're going to look at is in New Orleans. C.J. Spiller got some extra snaps this week, was productive in the passing game, but Mark Ingram still totaled 41 snaps, still led the way in rushing yards and carries by a wide margin, and even led the backfield in receptions again. So Ingram really flashing his receiving skills this year, not something that I expected coming into the year, but with that lack of true wideouts there and Jimmy Graham gone and in Seattle now, they are utilizing the backs more in the passing game. Ingram remains a must-start every week at this point, and if Sean Payton continues to creatively get C.J. Spiller involved in the passing game, he'll have some flex appeal, namely in PPR leagues. Doesn't look like they're going to use him a ton as a runner, just 2 carries for 10 yards this week, but Spiller is a dynamic back that can spring a lengthy touchdown, and he showed that off by reeling in a catch that went for 80 yards and a game-winning touchdown on Sunday night. So there's a potential for 2 useful backs in that backfield. Ingram, the much better back, that's not a surprise, but the fact that they were able to get enough touches for both backs to have some value this weekend is certainly eye-opening. Speaking of eye-opening, Todd Gurley, his breakout game came a few weeks earlier than I expected. Did think that he was going to take a little bit more time to be eased into the feature role, but 38 snaps for him, Total of 17 snaps divvied out to the other backs, Benny Cunningham and Trey Mason. Mason bringing up the rear with just 2 snaps and 2 carries. It went for -1 yards. Benny Cunningham totaled 0 yards on his 2 carries. And Todd Gurley erupted for 148 yards on 19 carries. Also reeled in 2 receptions. Could have had a touchdown run if he didn't opt to give himself up to keep the clock running and end that game in St. Louis. But he looked great. They do have a tough matchup with the very favored Green Bay Packers at home, which could result in them falling behind and Gurley not quite getting that opportunity to get the carries to follow up his breakout performance. But he's definitely clearly an RB2 at this point and has top 10 upside at the running back position. So kudos for those who were willing to roll the dice on him in fantasy drafts. He's definitely playing at a high level quickly, much sooner than I expected. I was thinking coming out of the bye week was when we were really going to see Gurley explode. So if you invested in him, I have a couple shares. I'm happy with that. Kudos to you as well. Looking in Washington, this is another situation that remains a mess. Jake Gruden did stay true to his word about getting Alfred Morris more involved. He led the backfield in snaps played, 36 to 34 for Chris Thompson, and just 16 for Matt Jones. Also led the way in carries with 17. That's more than Chris Thompson and Matt Jones combined, as they combined for 13 carries themselves. Morris led the way in rushing yards with 62, and he even caught 2 passes, which is really not a big part of Alfred Morris's game. But this is starting to feel like almost a best-case scenario for Morris, is that he's going to get 15 to 20 carries. He's going to need to find pay dirt or rattle off some lengthy runs and pick up some yardage, but he's really a non-factor in the passing game, 2 receptions notwithstanding. So Matt Jones seems to have fallen a little bit out of favor this week, just 7 carries for 11 yards, no receptions on 0 targets, but he still feels like the most capable back in terms of well-rounded 3-down value. Chris Thompson is there as the pass-catching complement to the whoever else is in the backfield. So even if Morris continues to rush effectively, I would expect Thompson to cut into his playing time, cap his ceiling by being that pass-catching back, since that's really not part of Morris's repertoire. So this backfield situation, not a good one, not one where you're going to want to be starting these guys most weeks. Morris, against a soft run defense, you can consider him as a flex in 12-team leagues or larger, but if it's against a bad run defense but a very good offense that ends up with a sizable point spread, still going to advise against using him, just because if the game script gets out of whack, they end up playing catch-up. Morris is just going to be a non-factor because he's not a receiving back. Moving on to the receivers and tight ends, we'll go back to Cleveland. Gives me a chance to toot the horn for Travis Benjamin once again. 10 targets, 6 receptions, 79 yards. Did have his touchdown streak snap, but he has clearly emerged as the #1 receiver there. He's very comfortably a starter at this point. As long as he's going to continue to get that volume, you're going to get a steady dose of receptions and yardage. And this being the first week that he hasn't scored a touchdown, he does have some touchdown appeal as well. None of the other receivers look like they're worth rostering at all. Andrew Hawkins played the most snaps, but he's been a complete non-factor this year. Dwayne Bowe ran his mouth a lot going into the week about how he's going to show off, why the team liked him and whatnot, and he laid another egg. He played 4 snaps, was targeted 1 time. We know the story with Dwayne Bowe. He's more sizzle than steak at this point. Did very little last year with the Chiefs. Hasn't done much in a few years now. So again, he's a non-factor. Brian Hartline was nicked up. Only played 3 snaps as a result of some injuries this week. So not a guy that I was advocating rostering anyways. But the real reason that I highlighted this position was Gary Barnidge, who surprisingly turned in another strong effort. Torched the Raiders last week, and that's to be expected. The Raiders have been torched by every tight end that they've played this year. Barnidge followed that up with a 6 reception, 75-yard, 1 touchdown performance. His third highest yardage total in his entire career, and his second most valuable fantasy performance. We're talking about a 30-year-old tight end. What he's doing is unprecedented for himself. He's already set his single-season high in receptions, and he's just a handful of yards off from setting or eclipsing his single-season high in receiving yards. But if you are a Greg Olsen owner this week, you're looking for a tight end to plug and play. Barnidge is in good form right now. McCown seems to be locked in with him. So you can certainly grab Barnidge. He is widely available. He's a little more than a bye week fill-in, and it wouldn't be shocking at all to see him turn into a pumpkin. But when you're looking to fill in for a guy like Greg Olsen, where you're not carrying two tight ends because you spent a premium pick on a top tight end like him, Barnidge is the type of plug and play that we're looking for. Moving on to Jacksonville, Allen Robinson turned in a good effort considering Vontae Davis was the #1 corner for the Colts, one of the best cover corners in the league. Robinson, 4 receptions for 80 yards, but Allen Hurns has stole the show. 11 receptions for 116 yards and a touchdown. Was targeted a whopping 14 times. He's gone for 60 yards or more receiving in all 4 contests this year. He's second on the team in targets and leads the team in receptions with 22. Also tied for the team league in touchdown grabs with 2. And it's been a 2-man show in the passing game for the Jaguars. You got 40 targets this year for Allen Robinson, 30 for Allen Hurns, and no one else is over 20 targets. So at this point, Hurns still widely available. He is worth a premium waiver claim. He is in lock and step with Blake Bortles there, so I do feel very comfortable spending a premium waiver claim on him, and he is a good guy to help bolster your receiving core at this point. Next up is a murkier situation in Miami. They enter the bye week with a new interim head coach, and they're coming off of Kenny Still's best showing as a Dolphin so far, 5 receptions for 81 yards. Jennings continued to be a non-factor. Devontae Parker disappeared after showing up a little bit in the blowout against the Bills 2 weeks ago. Jarvis Landry remains the top pass catcher and the top man in that passing attack. Was targeted more than any other receiver. Did lag behind Stills in receptions and receiving yards, but he's really the only reliable pass catching option in that offense. And with a new head coach in charge, it remains to be seen how playing time is going to be divvied up. I wouldn't cut ties with Rashard Matthews just yet, even off of a bad week. He did have a couple of very good weeks before that, and he still played the second most snaps among receivers, so there is a chance he remains the #2. But with a new head coach, may have some new favorite players, might do some things to try and motivate guys if who knows what he's seeing at practice if we aren't. Monitor that situation. That's one that's worth keeping tabs on playing time after they return to action in week 6. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, and Mike Wallace showed off that he is their #1 receiver in a game where Teddy Bridgewater attempted 41 passes. He attempted over 30 in just one game before that. That was the first game of the season where they got trounced by the 49ers. Since then, he's attempted under 25 passes in 2 games. This is still Adrian Peterson's show. They're going to lean on him as heavily as they can whenever they can. So unless these games get out of hand where they're stuck playing catch-up, don't expect him to air it out this often again. Wallace is worth rostering in 12-team leagues or larger, but you really need to play the matchup game with him. He can be used as a flex if the matchup's right, if he's not opposing a tough corner. But again, remember, this is the Adrian Peterson show. Charles Johnson was out. Rookie Stephon Diggs played okay. Second-year undrafted free agent Adam Thielen, total 6 receptions for 70 yards, but neither Thielen or Diggs need to be rostered at this point. Wallace is the most ownable receiver on the team. Kyle Rudolph did what Kyle Rudolph does, 2 receptions for 7 yards, but no touchdown. You need that touchdown from Rudolph. He's not a freak athlete tight end that's going to pick up a ton of receptions and a ton of yardage. It's basically TD or bust with him. So he's another guy that you have to play the matchups game with. Look and see what the opposing defenses are doing in terms of red zone and shutting down the tight ends. If they're soft and giving up touchdowns, Rudolph is in play as a fringe starter. If they're not, recognize that it's probably a situation where you're just not going to get much from him beyond needing that touchdown. Next up is New Orleans, where Brandon Cooks has basically been a dud this year. Once again, got a heavy dosage of targets, had 8, reeled in 4 of them, but total only 25 yards, did not find the end zone. He was a very popular breakout candidate in hopes that he was going to be a monster volume guy with Jimmy Graham gone, but targets have been there. Production really hasn't been. You're not obviously cutting Brandin Cooks. You're not going to get anything for him in trade at this point, but I would say it's pretty plain to see that he's not going to deliver on that early round pick. And unfortunately, at this point, you have to ride it out, hope that he has a few good games, and maybe you can move him at that point. No one else in the passing game looks to be terribly exciting. Marcus Colston's done. He's on his last legs. He looks at this point, it's safe to call him Zombie Colston. Not a lot left in the tank. Willie Snead was the leading receiver this week with 6 receptions for 89 yards. But we're talking about a guy who's not terribly fast, not very big. So he's not a big red zone threat, not a guy that's going to blow the top off of defenses. Has gotten some usage this year. So if you are in a 14-team league or larger, or a 12-team league with deep benches, you can add Snead once he clears waivers, but I wouldn't use a waiver claim on him. It looks like this is a situation where Breeze is content spreading the ball around, where they're going to use the backs a lot in the passing game. So I don't really want any part of that. Cooks still looks like the best of a bad lot in terms of the receivers, but that's not saying much at this point. Next up is the St. Louis Rams, where let's talk about another small receiver. Tavon Austin totaled 96 yards receiving on 6 receptions, scored 2 receiving touchdowns, was used a little bit as a runner again. They continue to use him as a gadget player, and he had a very strong showing against the division rival Arizona Cardinals, but this is just his second time in his 3-year career where he's totaled eclipsed 90 yards receiving. The last time he did that was week 10 of his rookie season. So I'm not looking at this as a breakout performance where he's asserting himself as a top receiver. He's still undersized. He's still more of a gadget player, and not worth a high priority. Even though the Rams felt that he was worth a high priority, selecting him 8th overall in the 2013 draft, I don't have any crazy delusions of him turning into a monster fantasy producer. I would actually lump him in to that Snead category, as if you're in a deep league, if you're in a 14-team league or a 12-team league with deep benches, sure, you can add him after he clears waivers if you're really hurting for some depth on your bench, but he's not a guy that I anticipate on making a big fantasy impact down the stretch. Next up is the San Diego Chargers, who suffered some unfortunate injuries this weekend. Steve Johnson bothered his hamstring, left early with a hamstring injury. Malcolm Floyd suffered a concussion. Both of them leaving open the door for Dontrell Inman to play 54 snaps. Did haul in 3 receptions for 88 yards, but Inman can go ahead and comfortably be left on waiver wires. Keenan Allen, once again, turned in another strong performance, 4 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown. The possible absence of Stevie Johnson and Malcolm Floyd certainly enhances the likelihood of Allen continuing to just rack up targets in bunches. But the club will also be getting Antonio Gates back this week, so that gives Rivers another safety blanket. If he is without both Steve Johnson and Malcolm Floyd, the return of Gates should help alleviate any concerns about Rivers' play dropping off as a result of injuries to key pass catchers. One thing that their absence could result in is more 2 tight end sets and keeping Ladarius Green in the fold as a pass catcher. Green was very good in the absence of Gates, but he will be the second fiddle at tight end, pretty much buried behind pass catchers like Danny Woodhead and Gates and Allen. But if he is the number 4, he is an athletic freak. I would say he's worth rostering one more week just to see how the injuries shake out, at least if Johnson and Floyd are going to miss this contest. If it looks like either or both will be ready for this contest, go ahead and cut bait on Green. But if the receivers are out, see how the Chargers decide to implement both Green and Gates this week, and see if there's enough ball to go around for Green. Most likely, if you were using and starting Ladarius Green, you're hurting at tight end anyways. Maybe you are a Julius Thomas owner and hoping to get by without him. But if he was just a number 2, if you were using him to fill in for Gronk this week, you can obviously comfortably cut him. Last situation we're going to look at is in Washington at receiver. Much like the backfield, well, actually not much like the backfield. This is a situation where there's one clear top target, and that's Pierre Garcon. 8 targets, total 7 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. He's really the only desirable pass catcher to own at this point because Jordan Reeves suffered a concussion. Also, I believe it was an ankle injury and a turned knee or something of that nature. Reed has no timetable for his return. The concussion is really the most frightening injury here because he has suffered concussions in the past. In his absence, it should be the Pierre Garcon show, but Jamison Crowder once again had a decent week. Total 45 yards receiving on 6 receptions in the Thursday night game against the Giants. Bested that this week with 65 yards receiving on 7 receptions. He's an undersized receiver. He's not very fast. Not going to be lining up outside, so he's not going to be a big touchdown threat. But if Reed's going to be out for a while, he could emerge as a low upside, modest floor option in PPR leagues if they're going to continue to use him in the slot, which I would imagine they will. Pro Football Focus credited him with running 32 of 39 routes from the slot this week. 82.1% of his routes were run from the slot. As an undersized receiver, that's a pretty good spot to slip him in. And in full-point PPR leagues, any guy that's going to catch 5 to 7 balls a week and average around 10 yards per reception has some value, but that's pretty much the ceiling we're talking about with Crowder. Like I said, he's not going to be much of a touchdown threat, and not a guy that you need to race out to grab right now. But if Reed's going to miss some time, and it certainly looks like he's going to, not sure how long, keep an eye on Crowder's usage this week. If Cousins continues to throw him the ball frequently, could be that low ceiling type of bench guy that you just grab. You hope to ride out some bye weeks by just getting a handful of points from him. But beyond that, not a lot to like in that passing game. Pierre Garcon is the clear number 1 there. And that's going to wrap things up. Thank you for tuning in this week. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for the awesome content that we have up in the articles, but also hop on the message boards. Very active. If you've got some draft questions, some free agent questions, very active community with a lot of knowledgeable gamers who are happy to answer questions, happy to partake in some discussion. Get on there, have some fun. Remember, we only get 17 regular season weeks of the NFL, so take a chance to really make the most of it and visit the website. And take care. Good luck this week.